The Galactic Council was a place of power, where leaders from every corner of the galaxy came together to make decisions that shaped the future. They sat in their grand chamber, surrounded by screens that displayed the latest information from across the stars. It was a place where advanced species held sway over the fate of weaker civilizations. And yet, there was one planet that had earned their attention for reasons they found laughable: Earth. Earth had sent a message to the Council, and it was simple. The humans were sending their fleet to a neutral zone where the Council had been, meeting with other species. The humans wanted to show they still had a military presence. It wasn't a threat, they assured the Council, but more of a demonstration of their ability to defend themselves. The Council didn't take it seriously. After all, humanity had long been considered a primitive species compared to the advanced civilizations that had been part of the Council for centuries. Human technology was outdated and unsophisticated. Their fleet, they believed, was a thing of the past, relics of a time when humanity was still struggling to survive. These so-called warships were more like floating museums, slowly rusting, away in old dry docks. Sitting at the head of the table was Supreme Leader Nothak, a being whose species had lived for thousands of years. His antennae twitched as he read the message. He couldn't help but chuckle. A relic fleet? How quaint, Nothak said, his voice dripping with condescension. Around the table, other leaders from different species laughed along with him. The Zarkian, a race known for their intelligence and mechanical prowess, leaned forward, crossing their arms. The humans are a joke. No one takes their fleet seriously anymore. They barely even have the resources to maintain it. Another member, a tall and graceful species known as the Altor, nodded in agreement. They've been avoiding war for so long, they probably forgot how to fight. The leaders spoke freely, mocking the Human Federation. Their fleet, after all, had been dormant for decades. The ships were old, the technology primitive. No one expected the humans to ever have the strength or power to challenge anyone. In their eyes, humanity was a relic of a forgotten age. Across the galaxy, in the Human Federation's command center, Commander Evan Cross stood at the head of a long table, much like the one in the Galactic Council chamber. But here, there was no laughter, no mockery, only seriousness. The situation was far from a joke. Cross was a man of few words, but today he had a message to send to the galaxy. The Federation had been preparing for years, and their old fleet, which had long been deemed obsolete by the galaxy, was about to be put to the test. Commander Cross looked at the men and women around him, veterans who had fought through years of conflict and technological advancement. They were united by a single powerful idea. No one, not even the most powerful species in the galaxy, could underestimate humanity. "We've been dismissed," Cross said, his voice steady and determined. "The Council thinks we're weak. They think we've forgotten how to fight. Well, it's time to show them we still have the strength to defend ourselves. This fleet may be old, but it is not useless. We've spent years improving it. It's time for humanity to take its place in the stars." A hushed silence filled the room as everyone processed his words. Then, one by one, they nodded. Cross had the support of his people. They were ready. Back on the Galactic Council, Nothak's laughter echoed through the chamber as he read another communication. It was a short message from the humans, stating they had completed the repairs and upgrades to their fleet. The fleet was now ready for deployment. "Are they serious?" one of the other leaders scoffed. "We're dealing with ancient technology here, Nothak. What can they possibly do with a fleet of relics? A few rusting old ships won't make a difference in the grand scheme of things." Nothak waved his hand dismissively. "They've had their moment. Let them send their fleet, and we'll show them just how outdated they are. It will be a simple demonstration of their incompetence." The council members agreed, and they continued their discussions, certain that nothing could come from the humans' actions. The galaxy would continue as it always had. and the humans would be left in their forgotten corner. However, the humans were not as forgotten as the Council thought. The human fleet, often called the Relic fleet by those who mocked it, began to move. Across Earth, the Federation's command center buzzed with activity. The ships, once neglected, had been carefully maintained and modified, each with upgrades that no one expected. The fleet of rusted metal warships slowly powered up, the old engines humming to life one by one. For weeks, Commander Cross had worked with his team to prepare. There were no grand new weapons, no sudden technological breakthroughs. But there was something that humans had always had: ingenuity. They had repurposed their old ships, outfitting them with experimental technologies that hadn't been seen in the galaxy for centuries. It was the heart and mind of humanity that made these ships more dangerous than anyone knew. As the fleet moved into position, Commander Cross stood aboard his flagship, the USS Vanguard, the largest and most powerful ship in the fleet. He looked out across the vast expanse of space where the Council's ships had once held unchallenged dominance. The moment was approaching. They would prove that humanity's past was not a weakness. It was a foundation for the future. The Vanguard was a symbol of everything humanity had overcome. The old ship had been the first human warship to reach the stars, and now it would lead the fleet to show the galaxy what humanity was truly capable of. "We're ready," Cross said to his crew. "Let's show the galaxy what we can do." Across the fleet, the other ships powered up. The Vanguard's engines roared to life, sending a wave of energy through the entire fleet. The relics, which had been abandoned for so long, were no longer useless. They were filled with new purpose. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council's mockery continued. They were confident that the human fleet would fall before their advanced technology, just as they had assumed from the beginning. They didn't understand. They hadn't seen what the humans had been preparing for years. The Council continued their meeting, unaware that just beyond the outer rim of their space, the human fleet was assembling, preparing to make its presence known. The vast expanse of space seemed to stretch on endlessly as the human fleet gathered, their ships powering up one by one. It had been years since anyone had seen these vessels in action. To the outside world, they were ancient relics, rusting, giants left to decay in the forgotten corners of the universe. But now, they hummed with life, ready to prove that humanity was not a species to be underestimated. Commander Evan Cross stood on the bridge of the USS Vanguard, his fingers lightly, tapping the console in front of him. His gaze was focused, his expression calm. But beneath the surface, there was a fire burning. He knew what was at stake. The galaxy had mocked humanity for too long. The time had come to remind them of just how much humanity was capable of. "Status report," he said, his voice steady, yet commanding. "All ships are online, sir," Lieutenant Emma Collins replied from her station. "We're ready to move out." Cross nodded, his eyes scanning the various ships in the fleet. The Vanguard was the flagship, but it wasn't alone. The USS Hope, the Farce, USS Phoenix, and many others had been restored and reimagined. Their hulls were scarred, bearing the marks of their age, but they were far from weak. Every ship had been outfitted with the best of what humanity had to offer. Weapons, shields, engines, everything had been carefully upgraded, designed to make these old warships as formidable as any new fleet in the galaxy. "Commander Cross," came the voice of his communications officer, Lieutenant Rylan Hayes. "The Galactic Council has received our transmission. They're not taking us seriously." Cross allowed himself a small smile. The Council had underestimated them, just as he had hoped. "They'll soon understand the truth," he said softly. The fleet began its journey, moving at full speed toward the neutral zone where the Galactic Council had set up a meeting. The route was carefully chosen, avoiding any chance of confrontation with the more hostile alien factions nearby. For now, they were there to make a statement, not to start a war. As the fleet approached the neutral zone, the vastness of space seemed to dwarf them. It was a strange feeling, knowing that in the grand scheme of things, the human fleet was just a small blip in the cosmos. But Commander Cross wasn't concerned with size. He was concerned with the message they would send. Meanwhile, in the heart of the Galactic Council's territory, the leaders continued their meeting. Supreme Leader Nothak stood at the head of the table, still dismissive of the human fleet's supposed threat. They had expected no more than a show, a simple reminder of the humans' old, outdated military. No one in the council room even bothered to pay attention to the incoming ships. "Let them come," Nothak said with a wave of his hand. "We'll watch their relics try to move. If they think they can compete with the power of our fleets, they're deluded." The Zarkian leader, a race known for their mechanical superiority, leaned forward, joining in the mockery. "It will be over in a matter of minutes. They'll be overwhelmed before they can even fire a shot." The Altor, one of the most peaceful species in the galaxy, nodded. "I don't even know why they bother. Perhaps they don't realize their time has passed." Their laughter filled the room. The Galactic Council, full of the most advanced species in the galaxy, was confident in their superiority. They couldn't fathom that the humans, a species they saw as primitive and out of place in the galactic community, would dare challenge them. But as the human fleet approached the neutral zone, something began to happen that none of the council members could have predicted. The USS Vanguard and the other ships in the fleet began to glow faintly, their engines rumbling with power. These old ships, once thought to be powerless and incapable of defending humanity, were now coming to life. The first sign that something was different came when the USS Vanguard powered up its engines, the massive ship vibrating as it moved. It wasn't fast by the standards of modern fleets, but there was a weight to its movement, a deliberate force that sent a shockwave through space. "Sir," Lieutenant Collins reported, "we're getting a signal from the Council. They've acknowledged our arrival." Cross stood straighter, his eyes narrowing as he saw the incoming communication. The Galactic Council, arrogant as they were now aware of the fleet. The next move would be theirs. "Let's show them," he said firmly. "Send the message." The fleet moved closer, each ship fully activated now, their systems humming with life. The USS Vanguard led the way, its powerful engines roaring as it took the lead. As the ships drew nearer to the neutral zone, the first signs of the Council's fleet came into view. These were the ships that the Council had sent to welcome the humans, sleek, advanced vessels that gleamed in the blackness of space. They were elegant and deadly, designed for speed and firepower. But as the human fleet entered the neutral zone, something remarkable happened. The Council's ships didn't engage immediately. Instead, they hesitated, watching the human fleet with caution, sensing that something was different. The USS Vanguard surged forward, its weapons systems coming online. "Commander," Lieutenant Hayes said, her voice rising with a note of uncertainty, "the Council's ships are taking up defensive positions. They're preparing to fight." Cross smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing. "Let them. They'll quickly learn that the human spirit can't be defeated by new technology." The fleet's weapons, though ancient by galactic standards, were more than capable of holding their own. The Vanguard, for example, had been outfitted with newly designed energy shields, capable of withstanding even the most powerful of energy blasts. Its weapons had been retrofitted with advanced targeting systems, allowing the humans to fight with precision and strategy rather than brute force. As the first shots were fired, the Council's ships quickly realized that they had underestimated the humans. The human fleet was not just a collection of outdated ships, it was a force that had adapted, learned, and overcome every obstacle in its path. The Council's ships, with their cutting-edge technology, found themselves at a disadvantage. A blast from the Vanguard struck an alien ship square in the side, sending it spinning out of control. The human fleet didn't hesitate. They moved as one. a united front of human strength and resilience. For every shot fired by the Council's fleet, the human ships responded in kind. But it wasn't just firepower that made the difference. It was the humans' ability to think outside the box, to adapt to the changing tides of battle that turned the tide. The Council's ships began to fall back, their pride shattered. They had expected the humans to falter, to crumble under the weight of their superior technology. But instead, the humans had proven their worth. The old ships, the so-called relics, had come to life, and they were showing the galaxy that humanity was far from weak. As the battle raged on, the Galactic Council watched in stunned silence. They had no idea that humanity's relic fleet would become a force to be reckoned with. The humans, with their ingenuity and determination, had proven that sometimes the past could be the key to the future. The battle between the human relic fleet and the Galactic Council's forces continued to unfold in the neutral zone. It was a scene no one had expected, a clash of ancient technology against the most advanced ships in the galaxy. The humans had managed to take the Council by surprise, and the Council was struggling to comprehend the power of the ships they had once laughed at. Commander Evan Cross stood at the bridge of the USS Vanguard, watching the battle unfold on the large display screens. His fingers lightly touched the console in front of him as his eyes scanned the incoming data. "Status report," he said, his voice calm, though his mind raced with thoughts of what was at stake. "We've taken down 3 of their ships, sir, Lieutenant," Emma Collins responded, her voice filled with determination. "Our shields are holding, and the enemy fleet is starting to fall back." Cross nodded, though he knew this was only the beginning. They had surprised the Council, yes, but there was still more to do. The Council's fleet was massive, and while the humans had proven they could stand their ground, they needed to finish the job. The battle had only just begun. Across the neutral zone, the alien ships that had been so confident in their superiority were now starting to panic. Their sleek, advanced vessels were no match for the humanity's warships, which had fought through years of neglect and disrepair. The alien forces had underestimated the power of the human fleet, and now they were paying the price. "We've hit their main line," Lieutenant Hayes reported from his station. "The Council's ships are breaking formation." Cross frowned. The enemy had begun to scatter, and that made them more dangerous. Disorganized fleets could be unpredictable, and they might try desperate moves. Humanity's fleet, though formidable, was still smaller and less maneuverable than the Council's. If the aliens regrouped, they could turn the tide. "We need to stay focused," Cross said, his tone firm. "We can't let them regroup." He turned to the helmsman. "All ships, move in. Keep the pressure on them." The Vanguard's engines roared to life, propelling it forward as the rest of the fleet followed. The human ships, though older, had an advantage in terms of experience. They had been prepared for this moment, for the day when the galaxy would doubt them. And now they had to prove that they were a force to be reckoned with. As the fleet advanced, the Council's ships attempted to regroup and fire back. They launched a barrage of missiles toward the human fleet, hoping to overwhelm them with sheer numbers. But the humans were ready. The Vanguard's shields absorbed the blast, holding firm as the alien missiles exploded harmlessly against its surface. "Damage report," Cross asked, his gaze never leaving the battle. "We've got some minor hull damage, sir," Lieutenant Collins replied, "but nothing serious. Our shields are holding steady." Cross allowed himself a small sigh of relief. The Vanguard was tougher than anyone had given it credit for. Its age had given it a certain resilience that modern ships lacked. The Vanguard had been built to last, to survive, and that's exactly what it was doing. As the human fleet pressed forward, they began to pick off the Council's ships one by one. The alien vessels, once so confident in their power, were now retreating, their formation breaking apart as the humans relentlessly pursued them. "Commander," Lieutenant Hayes said, his voice filled with urgency. "They're trying to flee. A few of their ships are breaking away from the main group." Cross's eyes narrowed. He knew what that meant. The Council's fleet was trying to regroup and find a way to escape, but they couldn't let that happen. If the aliens escaped, it would be a victory for them, and humanity's moment would be lost. "No one gets away," Cross said, his voice unwavering. "Keep the pressure on them. Pursue the retreating ships." The human fleet surged forward, closing the gap between them and the fleeing Council ships. It wasn't an easy task. The alien ships were faster, more agile, and they had the advantage of advanced technology. But the humans had something that the aliens lacked: determination. The human ships had been through the worst of times. They had survived against all odds, and now they were fighting to prove their place in the galaxy. As the pursuit continued, one of the alien ships, a large warship with heavy armor, turned to face the human fleet. It opened fire, sending a volley of energy blasts toward the vanguard. The human ship took the hit, the blast rocking the entire vessel. Sparks flew from the console in front of Commander Cross, but he didn't flinch. "Shields holding," Lieutenant Collins reported quickly. "It's taking more of a beating than expected, but we're still in the fight." Cross gritted his teeth. The alien warship was tough, but it wasn't invincible. He needed to act fast before it could launch another devastating attack. "Bring us in closer," he ordered. "We need to disable their weapons." The vanguard moved in, its massive guns charging. The crew worked swiftly, firing back with precision. The alien warship, while powerful, wasn't prepared for the ferocity of the human assault. In a matter of moments, the alien ship's weapons systems were disabled, and its shields began to crack under the pressure. One final shot from the vanguard was all it took. The alien warship exploded in a burst of light, its destruction signaling the collapse of the Council's last attempt to fight back. The remaining alien ships had no choice but to retreat. They had underestimated the humans, and now they were paying the price. The human fleet had proven itself to be more than a collection of relics. It was a force that demanded respect. Cross allowed himself a brief moment of victory as the last of the enemy ships fled. But he knew this was only the beginning. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. The Galactic Council would not forget this humiliation. They would regroup. They would retaliate. But humanity had shown them one undeniable truth. Humans were not to be underestimated. "Damage report," Cross said, turning back to his crew. "Minor damage across the fleet, sir," Lieutenant Collins replied. "Nothing we can't handle. We've taken a few hits, but the ships are holding up better than expected." Cross nodded. It had been a hard-fought victory, but it had sent a message. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. As the human fleet turned back to regroup, Commander Cross stood on the bridge, watching the stars outside. It was a moment of triumph, but he knew that it was just the beginning of humanity's journey through the stars. The Council may have underestimated them, but now they would have to reckon with humanity's strength. "We've only just begun," Cross whispered to himself, "and we'll keep fighting no matter what." The vast silence of space was a stark contrast to the intensity of the battle that had just taken place. The once proud fleet of the Galactic Council now limped away, some ships heavily damaged, others in full retreat. The human fleet, though, not without its own scars, stood firm. There was no victory celebration. There was only the calm that followed a storm. The USS Vanguard remained at the forefront, its engines humming steadily as Commander Evan Cross stood on the bridge, his eyes locked on the starry expanse ahead. "Status report," he said, his voice steady but tinged with an undercurrent of anticipation. "All ships are operational, sir," Lieutenant Emma Collins replied. "Minor damage across the fleet, but we've made it through. The enemy has retreated. The Council's ships are dispersing and attempting to regroup, but they've lost most of their combat capability." Cross nodded, but he wasn't entirely satisfied. He knew that this battle was just a small part of a much larger picture. The Galactic Council had underestimated humanity, but they wouldn't make the same mistake twice. The Council's defeat had been swift, but their pride would not let them rest. They would retaliate. He was sure of it. We can't afford to be complacent, Cross said. Prepare the fleet for potential reinforcements. We need to keep moving. The USS Vanguard's crew went to work quickly, responding to the command with military precision. The mood was focused, determined, as they prepared for the next phase of their journey. For now, they had proven their strength, but humanity's place in the galaxy was still uncertain. Thousands of light years away, in the heart of the Galactic Council's capital, a sense of shock and disbelief filled the air. Supreme Leader Nothak stood at the head of the council chamber, his antennae twitching nervously. He couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. The humans, whom he had written off as weak and insignificant, had decimated his fleet. The once feared council fleet, which had crushed countless adversaries before, was now fleeing before humanity's Relic ships. What is the meaning of this? Nothak growled, his voice filled with frustration. How could this happen? The Zarkian leader, who had always prided himself on his race's technological superiority, now looked uneasy. We underestimated them. Their ships. They were not as outdated as we thought. The Altor, whose peaceful nature had once made them hesitant to engage in combat, now stood with a solemn expression. We believed they were weak, but this proves we were wrong. The humans have shown more resilience than we gave them credit for. Nothak slammed his fist on the table, causing a ripple of tension to spread across the room. This is not acceptable. How can we allow a mere human fleet to defeat us? We are the most powerful species in the galaxy, and we were humiliated by humans. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier confidence now shattered. They had never expected the humans to have such a capability, especially not after so many years of being disregarded as a primitive species. They had thought that humanity's reliance on outdated warships would leave them vulnerable, an easy target for the galaxy's more advanced civilizations. But humanity had surprised them all. Supreme Leader, the Zarkian leader, spoke up. Perhaps we have been too focused on our own technological advancements. Maybe we need to rethink our approach. The humans, they fought differently than we expected. Their tactics, their determination, it's not something we can easily defeat with brute force alone. Nothak stared at the table in front of him, his mind racing. He was a leader who had seen countless battles, won and lost. But this defeat stung more than any other. The humans had outsmarted him, and it was a bitter pill to swallow. He had always believed that the strength of a fleet was determined by its technology, by its firepower. But now, he realized that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't in their ships, it was in their will to fight. We can't let this stand, Nothak finally said, his voice cold with resolve. We will strike back. We will show the humans that they are not welcome in this galaxy. The Altor leader spoke again, his tone more measured. What we need is a new plan. Rushing into another battle with the same tactics will only lead to more failure. We must understand how the humans fight, how they think, before we engage them. Again? Enough, Nothak snapped, clearly agitated. I don't need advice. I need action. We will send reinforcements. Overwhelm them with sheer force. The humans will not stand a chance. The Galactic Council, despite their doubts, reluctantly agreed. The defeat at the hands of the humans had shaken them, but they were not ready to accept it. Nothak, still seething with anger, began to make plans for a massive counterattack. This time, he promised himself, they would not be caught off guard. The humans would regret ever challenging the might of the Galactic Council. Meanwhile, in the human fleet, Commander Cross received the news that the Council had regrouped. They were preparing a larger force to retaliate, and this time, humanity would face a challenge unlike any they had encountered before. Cross wasn't surprised. He had expected the Council to retaliate, and now, the real test would begin. Commander, Lieutenant Collins said as she approached him, the Council has begun to mobilize a larger fleet. They're coming for us. Cross stood at the front of the bridge, his gaze fixed on the view screen. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The Council would come at them with everything they had, and humanity's fleet, despite its victories, was still smaller and less advanced than the Council's forces. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," Cross said, his voice steady. "But we've shown them that we can stand our ground. Now we need to be ready for whatever they throw at us." "We've already proven ourselves," Lieutenant Hayes said, a note of confidence in his voice. "We can't let them intimidate us. We've come this far. We can keep going." Cross turned to face his crew. "We're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting for our place in the galaxy, and we'll fight to the end." As the human fleet prepared for the incoming battle, the Galactic Council continued to regroup. They had learned a hard lesson. The humans, once thought of as weak and insignificant, had proven themselves to be a force to be reckoned with, and now the real war would begin. The stars stretched out endlessly before Commander Evan Cross, a sea of cold light in the vast darkness of space. The human fleet had seen its first victory against the Galactic Council, a victory no one had expected. The remnants of the Council's fleet had retreated, but Cross knew this battle was far from over. The Council would regroup, and they would come back stronger. "Status report," Cross asked, his voice steady as ever, though he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was their time to prove that humanity had earned its place in the galaxy, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. "We've secured the neutral zone," Lieutenant Emma Collins reported, her eyes scanning the monitors. "The enemy has pulled back for now, but they've begun calling for reinforcements. The rest of their fleet is still scattered." Cross nodded, his eyes narrowing. "They will come for us again, but we've shown them we're not to be underestimated. They will think twice before making their next move." It was clear that the Galactic Council's leaders were not accustomed to failure. They were used to crushing their enemies without hesitation, and humanity's sudden rise to power had thrown them off balance. But that wasn't enough. The war wasn't over yet, and humanity's fleet needed to remain vigilant. As the fleet continued to hold its position in the neutral zone, the commanders discussed their next steps. Cross knew the Council would not simply sit back after their defeat. Their pride would force them to retaliate. The question was not if the Council would strike back, but when. "You did well, Commander," Lieutenant Rylan Hayes said, his voice filled with respect. "We've done what no one thought possible. The Council's fleet was formidable, but they couldn't break us. We held our own." Cross turned to Hayes and nodded. "We fought well, but now we need to prepare. We've only won the first round. The Council will come at us with everything they've got. And when they do, we need to be ready." The human fleet had already proven its worth, but now was the time for the next phase of the battle. The Council, with its immense power, would not let this defeat go unchallenged. Humanity had proven it was capable of surprising its enemies, but that didn't mean the Council wouldn't bring their full might to bear. As the days passed, the tension within the human fleet grew. The crew knew what was at stake. They were fighting not just for their survival, but for the future of humanity. The Council had shown them one thing. They were willing to fight for their place in the galaxy, and they would not back down. Meanwhile, in the heart of the Galactic Council's capital, Supreme Leader Nothak was having a very different conversation. He sat at the head of the table, his antennae twitching with frustration as his advisors presented their reports. The damage to the Council's fleet had been severe, and it was a humiliation that no one in the galaxy would forget. "We cannot let this stand," Nothak growled, his voice filled with anger. "The humans have made a mockery of our strength. We cannot allow them to take control of the neutral zone. We must strike back, and we must do it now." The other Council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had expected a swift victory, but instead they had been dealt a blow they had not anticipated. The humans had outsmarted them, using their outdated ships in ways that even the most advanced technology couldn't counter. "What do we know about the humans?" one of the advisors asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Their tactics are unorthodox. We need to understand how they fight if we are to defeat them. Nothak slammed his fist on the table. They are unpredictable, yes, but that doesn't matter. We have the numbers and we have the firepower. We will overwhelm them. Send our reinforcements to the neutral zone. Prepare for a full-scale assault. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. They were hesitant, knowing that this would not be an easy victory. The humans had shown they could fight, and they had the resolve to win. But Nothak was adamant. He would not let this failure stand. "We will bring everything we have," Nothak said, his voice growing more determined. "We will show the humans that they are nothing more than an anomaly, a fleeting moment of resistance. The galaxy belongs to the Council, and we will remind them of that." While the Galactic Council began its preparations for a retaliatory strike, the human fleet was hard at work fortifying its position. Cross knew the battle ahead would be tough, but he also knew the humans had an advantage. They had something the Council didn't: unity and determination. The humans had fought for their survival before, and they were ready to do it again. "We've proven that our Relic ships can hold their own," Cross said during a fleet-wide briefing. "Now it's time to show the galaxy that our strength isn't just in our ships. It's in our people. We'll fight for Earth, for humanity's future, and we'll do it together." The crew members of the fleet nodded in agreement. They had been to the brink of destruction, and now they were standing tall. The fleet's readiness and resilience had been tested, and they had passed. They were no longer just Earth's defenders. They were humanity's champions. "Prepare for the Council's counterattack," Cross ordered. "We'll be ready." Days turned into weeks, and the human fleet continued to monitor the movements of the Galactic Council. They knew the aliens were preparing for something big, but they weren't sure when the next strike would come. Despite the uncertainty, the humans remained steadfast. Their fleet had survived the first wave, and they would survive the second as well. Finally, the day came. The Council's reinforcements arrived in force, their fleet far larger than anything the humans had seen before. Thousands of ships, each more powerful than the last, descended upon the neutral zone. The time for talk was over. Now, it was time for battle. As the enemy ships closed in, Commander Cross stood on the bridge of the USS Vanguard, his face set with determination. He had led his people through the impossible, and now they would face the greatest challenge of their lives. "All hands, prepare for battle," Cross said, his voice firm but calm. "This is humanity's fight. Let's show the galaxy who we are." The human fleet, though smaller in number, was ready. They had the experience, the will to fight, and the knowledge that they had already proven themselves once before. The Galactic Council may have underestimated humanity, but they would not make that mistake again.